The views expressed and the opinions given by the individual host and their guests do not necessarily reflect those of Para-X, its affiliates, or its sponsors.
Step outside of your comfort zone. See the world with a whole new perspective. Join us and experience the unexplained on the Paranormal
View. And welcome everybody right here to the Paranormal View on the Paranormal Radio Network. I want to thank everyone for being with us here tonight, those in the chat room and those listening from around the world. Tonight we've got another great show lined up for you, and might as well just go ahead and get started. So tonight we have with us Barbara Duncan.
Hello, everyone.
And we have Jeffrey Gould.
Hello, hello. Happy April.
Happy April, huh?
4 weeks and I hit another birthday. Yeah.
Well, that's okay. It's April Fool's, so we won't tell nobody. How's that sound?
That was a few days ago, actually.
I carry it out for a while, though. It's still April.
Well, today is the official countdown day.
Yes,
it's 4, 3, 2, 1.
That's what I heard.
Oh, very nice.
So we'll see how the show goes. We might make it. We might not. So with that, let's get started. We got a lot of stuff to talk about tonight. So, Jeff, why don't you introduce our guest as if they actually need an introduction?
Seriously? Well, tonight we have a longtime friend of the show and one of our favorite returning guests, Thomas Wertman, former dean of the American National University, state director of MUFON, and former co-director at, but still works with, the Cleveland Ufology Project. So welcome back, Thomas Wertman.
Good evening. I'm ready to go too, Henry. I'm ready tonight. I've got my coffee maker full. My beer cooler is nice and chilled. And in case we really get wild, I've got a bottle of Crystal Skull vodka sitting in front of me, too.
Crystal Skull? Really?
Yeah.
That stuff is awesome.
Oh, yeah.
That's somebody I would love to get on the
Crystal
show.
Skull back. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to get him on the show. Yeah. All right, with that, we got a lot of stuff to talk about tonight. We got some stuff to listen to, and may be easy to be heard and may not be easy to be heard. So we'll try, and anyway, you'll be able to explain everything. So with that, why don't we just get started? Because you got some new stuff that you want to talk about.
Yeah. The one thing that I do is, when different stories break on the news, I mean, I read over the stories close, and I go over them like 5, 6, 7 times. But what I end up doing, and I do the same thing when I watch television shows, by the way, regarding paranormal, UFOs, etc., is I'll watch the show, but I'll go back and at times do my own research. I mean, you'll see me on my cell phone, on the internet, Googling stuff. You'll see me on my computer, my laptop, researching stuff as the show's running. And I'm just, checking out the facts, seeing how things all line up with each other. And there's a few shows, to be honest with you, Henry, when I'm out there, there are a lot of colorful metaphors coming out when I'm describing what's going on about the show. Because some of their facts aren't quite factual. And that drives me nuts, because the bad part about that is when they present the shows, I mean, people are taken for what they see a lot of times. And if the facts are being distorted, being altered, they may not know from the real events. I remember, I think we've talked about Travis Walton in the past, who had the abduction experiences back in the 70s. And one of my friends, matter of fact, we graduated together in the 1970s. We graduated. We didn't have a whole lot of contact in school, but this individual shows up at one of our MUFON of Ohio meetings one day and says, "Hey, didn't I go to school with you?" And we started talking. I'm like, "Yeah, we did go together. We graduated together." And that was like 40 years ago, Well, we've become friends since then. We talk occasionally. And at one of the talks, she says, one of the things I'm really fascinated with is that that Travis Walton story because of the movie Fire in the Sky. And I said, do you know the movie was largely made up? She goes, what? I said, yeah. I said, a lot of stuff inside the ship where he had all these membranes around him and they were doing all this stuff to him. I said, that was all made up per Travis. And Boom was like, you took a balloon and just popped it right then. Because she took a lot of things that she'd seen for granted. So that's why I tend to research stuff. And not just look at a website. I go to a number of different websites, but I like to see if I can find the raw data behind the stuff. And that's what I was doing, Henry, with this case when it popped up, because what happened is there's an incident back in July of 2019 where it happened off the coast of California, Southern California to be exact. We've talked in the past about like islands down in there, like San Clemente Island and some of the ones down in that region. I believe they call them the Channel Islands down in there. We've talked about UFOs being seen there in the past. And the one incident in particular that occurred down in that region, I know we've talked in the past about, was the one of the USS Nimitz, which was the naval carrier that back in 2004, they had an incident with UFO, not just one UFO, but multiple UFOs, or as they're terming them now a lot of times, UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena. That was one which was really brought out in public, where the pilot, one of the pilots, actually a couple of pilots on board the Nimitz have come out and talked about their experience, their encounter with the UFO off the coast of California, that these UFOs had been observed for a period of roughly about 2 weeks on radar. They were eventually, their flight was diverted out to intercept a couple of these UFOs because it was in an area where there's a lot of military exercises going on throughout the year. Well, they'd overlooked them in the past, I think largely because of their actions. They said, well, we don't have aircraft which can go from like X number of 1,000 feet down to sea level in like 1 second. They didn't really put a whole lot of emphasis on investigating until one day back in 2004. The flight was diverted. To make the long story short, Commander Fravor, who was flying one of the jets, was actually the flight commander, and he was coming in at roughly about 30,000 feet, and he was directed to a site roughly 100 and some odd miles southwest of San Diego. Well, as they're directing him in, he's getting closer, he gets to a point where they said, you merged plot, which means you're at the same location UFO is at. He's like, I don't see a UFO. And then he looked down at the water level, and he could see the water almost would appear to be churning up. He saw what appeared to be an object hovering over the water, so he starts descending to investigate and leaves a wingman up high. As he gets down to, I think he said about 14,000 feet going out of memory here, he was actually making a large circle, kind of descending, and the UFO appeared to see him, and it started coming up towards him, doing the opposite side of the circle. Well, he says, well, I'm going to cut to the chase. I'm just going to cut across the circle and see if I can intercept this thing. And the thing, he said, took off and went over the horizon in just a couple of seconds. And he goes, we don't have anything in our arsenal that can move that fast. Well, he's been very vocal about it. He doesn't say it was an alien craft from another world. He just says, I don't know what this thing was I encountered, but, I'd really love to fly one of those things, whatever it is. So this story that happened in 2004, a lot of other stories now are being compared to it. And one thing I tell people is, I said, when these UFO incidents come out, the one thing that I don't like to do is I do not like to compare it to other sightings without data behind it to support it. Because otherwise you can kind of confuse a couple different incidents by kind of like making the material kind of like overlap each other, which it may really not. So I like to treat every case pretty much as a separate case and build it up on its own. Well, when the story came out on a website called The Drive about this incident in 2019, they said that, hey, this is an area off the coast of California where we had the mysterious, as they called them, Tic Tacs. That's what they called the UFO incident that happened back in 2004. We've got the Tic Tacs again, basically, is what they're kind of implying. Well, I wouldn't like to make that comparison without data really to support it. What was happening in 2019 is a story come out basically by Twitter that there's some tweets going on that there was an incident back in 2019. There were FOIAs that were requested, Freedom of Information Act were requested, to pull up data behind what happened. And the data that they were looking for was the ship's logs. I mean, to me, this is good documentation that something happened on board that ship. It's down in writing. It wasn't presented by the Drive exactly who attained those FOIAs, but there are a couple different names mentioned. One was Dave Beatty, who was involved in doing gathering information for basically a documentary on like the Tic Tac events and stuff like that. Another one's a guy who runs a website. He goes by the name of UFO Joe. It may have also been him that requested the FOIAs. But nonetheless, the FOIAs came out. And when they came out, to me, when I look at these things, I don't know if I'm seeing all the documents that were received, or this is the snippets that they said, okay, this is what you asked for, this is what we're going to send you. Because with those requests, you have to be very specific. If they just came out and said they wanted a copy of like the ship's logs from a couple of various vessels, in this case, one was the USS Kidd, they're not going to get the whole log. They're going to have to be very specific on exactly what they're looking for. So they have to come out
Thomas,
and say, okay, yes.
when you talk about ship's logs, are you talking about what they actually write down as a report, or is it a transcript of intercom traffic?
It's basically the communication that's going on. I hate to use the word assuming, but the master log that's being kept in the command area. The different ones are making notations, and as the ship is sailing, what they'll do is they'll make notations, Barbara, like, okay, we're sailing in such and such a direction potentially. This is something going on special on the ship at this point. It's being documented. Now, they didn't say if this is like the master ship log or if this is just one that's being kept by a various somebody who's basically in charge of a given area at this time. But it was a written log. So when this thing comes in, I saw this. It says, okay, we've got this snippet which says an event happened, and kind of give you an idea of what happened. On the evening of the 14th, you had, in this case, they mentioned USS Kidd, but there are actually two destroyer groups. It was termed as Destroyer Group, I believe, 23, going out of memory here, of which had at least 6 destroyers in. And they're all of a similar class, an Aegis class ship, which is basically some of our more state-of-the-art ships. In that time, it appeared to be they were doing training. You had the USS Russell, the USS Kidd, the USS Raphael Peralta was out in that same region. The USS Finn, or John Finn, I should say. These ships, and also the USS Paul Hambleton, I believe I named them all. They were roughly in this area. And these were the ones mentioned in their report. Well, they're basically in 2 different groups sailing off of, it was San Nicolas Island, I believe it was. They're kind of west of that region. And they were heading south. an area south that would have been, put them roughly, look at my map here, about 100 miles off the coast of San Diego, almost perfectly straight out from San Diego. They're heading down in that region when they noticed, in this case, what appeared to be two, and they termed them in the report as UAVs, unidentified aerial vehicles. Well, what they do at the time is, they've got to be tracking these things, you would think, electronically. They've got to be picked up on radar, but what the log shows is other goings on. Now, they had a team they dispatched called a Snoopy team. And when I saw that word pop up, I'm like, what? Snoopy? Well, the Snoopy team stands for a ship, nautical, or otherwise photographic interpretation and exploitation team. To really sum it up, what they do is they put people up in an area of visual sighting, but they're using cameras and binoculars and basic opticals to try to get an eyeball on whatever they're seeing. They're using really sometimes not super cameras, but standard commercial grade cameras to photograph these things, because you think about it, I mean, they can get a camera up in a second, take photographs of these objects, whatever they are, and they've got a visual record of what's being observed. Well, they deployed this team to observe what was going on, and it happened roughly about 9:56 in the evening. So they made a note in the log. They observed them, but then where it's not super detailed in the log and in the report is they're not saying whether what the Snoopy team observed they considered serious enough, or if it was a automatic thing on board the ship. About 20 minutes later, they used a term in their log that they said set River City. Well, it's a code of what they do is they shut down basically the equipment which is broadcasting a signal telling where the ship is at. Because the ship is equipped with an AIS system which puts out basic information giving the longitude and latitude of ships. Now, in 2017, from what I could find out, naval ships started putting out this information. So this way they could track these ships where they're at. Now, it doesn't mean they can't turn it off. But what they did is they turned off this emissions equipment to basically shut a signal down going off from the ship. And one of the reasons they do that is if they're putting out a signal giving position, potentially a foreign power could have some use for that. It could be just tracking where the ships are at. It also could be using a technology like a drone to pick up on that signal and actually target the ship based on the signal they're putting out regarding position. And I was reading an interesting article the other day on there, Henry, where they're working on a technology where they're creating drones which can come in as a swarm. They actually called it like locust. The drones would come in like locust and attack a ship based on those signals. So it's not just like one cruise missile you have coming out towards a ship. You actually have multiple smaller weapons all coming in like a swarm of locusts. So they shut that signal down per this report at that time. They also notified other ships in the region. They notified per another log. The FOIA request also requested a log of another ship. The other ship was the USS John Finn, which is a similar class of destroyer. And these destroyers, by the way, I kind of think of the old movies, the old John Wayne movies, like In Harm's Way, with the large guns, everything else. Well, these actually rely more on missiles and other systems now. Well, they notified the John Finn, and per the John Finn's logs, they showed at 10:07 that the kid notified them that they had a UAV directly overhead. They were notifying the kid. The kid was actually in close proximity to where the USS Kidd was. So the Finn and the Kidd were very close together. They also sent their longitude and latitude coordinates. Now, what I did is I took their longitude and latitude and put it into Google Earth so I could kind of get a fixed position on where they were at. The John Finn also notified their individuals they called the Snoopy team to go out and also do visual observations with cameras, binoculars, everything else. So that ship basically was also being put on alert. The Finn reported themselves 2 drones directly over above their ship. So now you had 2 different vessels reporting drones. They also had put their ship into a status where it said they were going into status of basically low visibility. So I hate to use the word assume, not since I'm not familiar with the naval ships, but it sounds like they're basically shutting down lights and other things like that would put off a visual image of what was going on. And they also cut down like audio sounds that were being transmitted from the ship. More likely cut off, like say, speakers and so forth on there. So they secured those, so they were putting off a lower signature. The Kidd at 22:27 reported again a drone was overhead at that time. And again, they provided their longitude and latitude. So you had 2 naval ships reporting what was termed as drones directly overhead. Now, all this is coming through on visual, and I couldn't help but wonder, nothing is coming out in any of these reports on what is being picked up electronically. So what I did is I went back just for curiosity, and I said, this AIS system, which is a transponder system, they deactivated it. Let's see what I can find out on that, because I'm familiar with tracking like civilian aircraft, commercial aircraft. There's some limited military stuff I can pick up on. But I wondered what I could find out. Well, I found a website where I could actually pull up the information that was being picked up on this AIS system that was being recorded. And I went in. It actually comes out in a spreadsheet, so it's, Barbara. But the problem is the spreadsheet was mammoth. It was way too big for the programs I used to open up. But I did find another way to open it up, and what it ended up being is like 8 million files.
Jeez.
For a year. Yeah, 8 million files.
Wow.
And I was sorting down through these things. And the article primarily said, okay, you have the Kidd, the Finn, and these other basic ships in this region heading south. And they didn't give a whole lot of information. I couldn't help but think, I said, what else was in that same region out there? Well, when I pulled up this AIS system, it also showed me civilian ships in the region, commercial ships out in that region. I mean, you could have freighters you could see coming in. You could have freighters going out. You had basic fishing vessels in the region. I also identified more military, naval ships in that same area that weren't mentioned in the article at all. Roughly, I think it was about 70 miles, 100 miles south of where the Kidd and the Finn were at, was the Teddy Roosevelt, a carrier. And the carrier was actually supposed to be in charge of those destroyer groups from the information I found, because this is the thing I love about the internet. You go into certain sites where it's like naval sites. It's not like blogs that somebody has basically on Twitter or something like that. Here was a U.S. Navy site where they're posting certain ships had been deployed on a certain date in a group. That's where I found out that the kid was in Seattle 2 days before getting fueled before they headed down the coast. It also showed what ships were in the same group as the kid. They had that right on the internet on the naval website. But they didn't give super details, but I knew roughly what ships were in the region. So when I went through these sites, I said, okay, let's see what other vessels are out there. So besides the Teddy Roosevelt, I also found USS America was actually appeared to be going into port. That one's not like a full carrier, but it's actually more of a type of a ship that resembles a carrier, but they've got more like helicopters and stuff for transporting personnel to the shore. That was also in the region. So we had these reports coming in, and on the one, they also reported that they were seeing, in this case, and I'm glancing down through my notes here, they saw a red flashing light from one of the objects. Now, to me, when it comes up like a red flashing light, I'm thinking potentially something like a drone may have been flying overhead. And it also, when I saw the article itself, the title of the original article, they mentioned multiple destroyers were swarmed by mysterious drones. So it's almost like they're looking directly at drone activity for some reason, at least from the point of the article's view. Well, that was night number one that they had these encounters. There was a second night to come. Well, the same ships were in roughly the same region. When I go into those on the 15th, I'm kind of scrolling through my notes here real quick. Okay, there we go. On the 15th, the next night, at 2038, the USS Rafael Piarta, I believe I pronounced that right, made a note that they saw what appeared to be low-flying UAVs coming over their ships, over their ship. They also deployed their people out for visual observations, their Snoopy team. And so, you know, it's let's see, Barbara, you spelled it right, P-I-A. But what was interesting is the ship logs. Most of them spelled it P-I-A, but a couple of them spelled it P-Y, like the dog.
I know that was what was making it difficult for me to find the words for the acronym again.
Yeah. But I had to really start looking up a ton of acronyms too on there too, Jeffrey, because it was driving me nuts as I went through these papers. That's what took so long. Also, another thing I found out, just as a side note, when I pulled up the information on the AIS site, which gave me the positions, I'm thinking about their data. I'm like, wait a minute, the time frames. What is their time frame based on? Because the ship logs were based on their local time. But when you're giving somebody spreadsheet data for across the whole world, basically, of these ship positions, I'm like, they wouldn't be using local times. They'd be using what's called UTC time, which is a universal time. And everything has to be based from that. That's the same thing they do with aircraft data. They base it on UTC time. So what I had to do in my calculations, I had to allow 7 hours difference from UTC time to where they were at off the Pacific coast in my calculations. And then my positions were falling pretty much exactly where they had their ships marked in the articles. Well, at the second night, I mean, here they observed another UAV overhead, roughly about 9 o'clock. The USS Kidd also said that they had drones flying around their ship again. They deployed their Snoopy team, and they said the drones were on their starboard side. They also made a comment that they had multiple drones around the ship. But what was interesting in the log is they crossed out the word above the ship to begin with, and then left it as being around the ship later on. Then they made a notation. It wasn't really that clear. They said that they issued a command to man and mark 87 stations, and there were several terms that I found out they could have been referencing. But I think what they were referring to is they were having somebody man their electronic equipment, that they've got certain things that go off their Aegis system, their electronic cameras and so forth. They wanted to see if these cameras could get a better view, I believe, of what these objects were that were going around the ship. So now you had these things for 17 minutes at least flying around the region from those notations in the log. Then the Russell at the same time, which wasn't in the same region as the Kidd, there was roughly about 100 miles distance between them. The Russell said that they're at this location. They sighted multiple drones at 32 degrees. And they gave, I won't give the exact perfect location, but basically they spotted the drones 30 degrees from their ship, which would basically put it in a northeast direction. They saw a drone moving up there, going from basically left to right. They spotted another drone. It basically, easiest way to describe it is roughly about between about 9 o'clock position. About 2 minutes later, they saw another drone roughly in that same direction, moving left to right. Then they spotted a drone at 21:38, still roughly about 9 o'clock position. But what was interesting, they started giving altitudes of these things. They said it appeared to be 1,000 feet above the water. At 21:40, they found another drone. This one was roughly about 7 o'clock position, about 700 feet. And it keeps going on that they had roughly about 9 or so different notations of drone activity around their ship. And one of the images I sent to you, Henry, was actually a image of where the Russell would have been with all the various directions, like around the clock face, in reference to where they were at. And so, you know, Barbara, where the ship was at, the Russell, it was roughly right around San Clemente Island, which in this case, San Clemente Island is an area where it's basically used for a lot of naval activity, where they do a lot of training on the island itself. And I don't know if anybody really knows exactly what all goes on that island. One of the things that's suspected is potentially being drones being operated around that island.
Now, when you're saying drones, are we talking like a drone-sized thing that you can buy in a store and fly, or are you talking maybe UFO size?
Well, that's a good question, Henry, because one of the things that they did is they started notifying other ships in the region. One of the ships that they notified on the second night was actually a cruise ship. It was the Carnival Imagination. And the Carnival Imagination said that they'd also seen drones going around their ship. And they were kind of coming between Catalina Island and the shore. They were kind of coming up that area in the channel in there. They were going north, basically coming into port, when they saw the ship or these drones going around their ship. They checked with another ship that was in the same region, the ORV Alguda, which is basically it's a fishing vessel. They checked with them and they sent them a thing. It was actually an email that they had a copy of that they posted, requesting information from this fishing vessel, saying, "Are you operating drones?" Because they also thought maybe the cruise ship, the Carnival Imagination, was operating their drones on their own. And this fishing vessel said, "Yeah, we have drones." And they mentioned they're using these ones called Phantom drones, Phantom 4s, which is basically a drone that anybody can buy. They're roughly about under 18 inches, something like that. And this fishing vessel, I had to kind of laugh at the response. They said, well, they only go a few feet from the ship. They don't go very far. Well, that's not quite accurate, just to let you know.
Yeah, but they have a pretty short range, right? I mean, you have to stay within a certain radio distance in order to fly them.
Yeah.
And that can't be that far.
Well, when they said a few feet, that wasn't exactly right.
Yeah.
One of the people that was in the astronomy group I'm in, he had a couple of those drones down at the astronomy club, and it was actually kind of a hilly area. And he took this thing off, and he's up easily 500 feet in a matter of seconds. And I don't know the exact distance, but it was definitely not a few feet. I lost sight of where the drone was at, and he was showing me direct visual images on his cell phone coming back from the drone. And it was quite a ways out. I would easily say it was probably about 1,000 feet from where we were, if not more. And the thing he's limited, though, to is the time frame. I mean, yeah, you can run this thing out, and you can take it up to 500 feet. You can take it out to 1,000 feet or more, but he's still going to be limited to like about a 15-minute time frame for total flight time. But I did find another drone in that same category, though, Barbara, that is like one of the newer style drones. It's extremely light. It went for, let's see, what was it, 40-some minutes flight time? But they couldn't take it at super high speeds, but it could go up for that long. But these were smaller ones. Well, again, I would rule out the fishing vessel just because of the fact that from where the fishing vessel was at and where these naval ships were, the distance would have been too great for that thing to get out that far, and especially not only get out that far, but come back. But the Navy themselves is also working on, Henry, the same size drones. And they're sending them out basically as like one-way tickets. You send them out to get the information. If they lose them, they lose them. They just look at like it's not that expensive compared to other technology, so what the heck, you know? Now, that's one of the things they've... Yeah.
Surely there has to be a protocol for what the Navy can and cannot do if a drone gets too close to their ships. Are they allowed to shoot them down?
Well, that was where one of the questions kind of came up when they put this ship on alert, and they used this term, what was it, Mark 87. They said it most likely was not, but one of those, the terms also goes very similar to using their basically like their Gatling guns to take something down, the chain guns that they have on board the ship. And they said they didn't believe that's what it was for, but it could have been connected to a reference to getting those ready. But I had the same question, is if something comes that close and you identify it's not yours, why can't you take it down, you know? Yeah, either by shooting it or electronic technology bringing it down somehow.
Well, if it was...
But also...
Go ahead, Barbara.
But also, there's no identifier on these drones, correct? So that there's no way to determine who it belongs to. It's not like a transponder on an airplane where you can say, okay, this belongs to so-and-so, and it came out of this location. So
that's right, at least as of yet. But they're working on that technology. But the problem is you're always going to have somebody smarter that says, I know how to disable that or get around it.
Yeah.
It's like the old saying, a lock only keeps out an honest person.
So were they thinking that maybe the enemy of some sort was spying on them to see what they were doing or tracking them?
Well, this is where, yeah, it's a good question, Henry, but they're not exactly sure. From these notations and all their logs and the way the actions were by the notations and the logs, it's like they didn't know who was operating these things whatsoever.
Well, I don't think it
The
would have
region
been
they
from,
were in.
I don't think it would have been from UFOs.
No. But the thing is somebody's operating these things off the coast in an area where they conduct a ton of military exercises. And the question is at the end of the day is, who's operating them? Is it us?
Would they have to be in visual contact with them to be able to fly them around the ship or back to their base or something?
Well, this is where they're saying that on these nights that they had low visibility. And when I checked it out, there was a cloudy evening, and at one point they said the visibility was down to 1 nautical mile. And they said that tracking a ship would have been very, very difficult unless, to me, they're picking up on electronic signatures of the ship that they can potentially monitor, or they have maybe something like an infrared technology that they can pick up on the motions. And then, that's some of the big questions is who was operating and what technology was on board these things, because the military themselves has a lot of variety of drones. One in particular I was looking at there's one called something like the Sea Scout, which looks like a small helicopter, small version of a helicopter, which has electronic equipment on it. And they fly these things off of cruisers. Actually, cruisers are equipped with 2 of them that they use for when they go out. And the thing is there I couldn't find anything where any notes they were flying those. It's almost like based on these logs, nobody knew who was flying them, us, them, or who knows. But a couple other things that popped up is at one point they said one of these objects was observed for 90 minutes.
Yeah, they got some kind of technology to big batteries in them or something. It's going to last a while. Yeah.
This is where we need a large capture net to be able to grab one.
Yeah. Or here's the other thing that could be happening, Barbara. You could have also had misidentifications at the same point. So many people were reporting things. Now, one of the comments came up is, well, these are naval personnel. They're trained. Yes, they are trained to do things. But if you have low visibility conditions, could they have misidentified a star for one of these objects? And I looked up, and Vega was directly over their head at the time of this incident. And I'm thinking if the weather broke just right, they may have seen something like that. Now, it's not taking away everything else that happened out there.
So how close were they saying these things came to the ships?
They didn't say exactly. They gave an altitude at the one point, but they didn't have exact distances. And this is where, Henry, I'd love to see the electronic data behind it. But there are additional communications going out that basically the ship, they were notifying upper echelon commanders. And they were requesting even the crew members' names who had seen these objects, who had observed them, what ships they were on. Now, this information's all redacted in emails. But you can see where this stuff was requested, so it's very possible they're going to be doing follow-up interviews of all these personnel.
Yeah. To see just what they said and stuff. So,
yeah.
How long did these things fly around the ships?
The time frame going off, and this is where I was trying to piece everything together because I got to go through all the various ship logs and kind of like cut and paste everything together, but it looks like roughly right around a 90-minute or more time frame.
And then they all just disappeared.
What's that?
They all just disappeared then, left?
Yeah, just disappeared. And these are some of the really, questions that come up about this is, you got an incident going on like this, and the bad part is the way that some of this stuff is being worded. Yeah, they're using the words like drones or using swarms, but at other points, they're using UAVs. And they said, well, these things went 100 miles. Well, not necessarily 100 miles. They wouldn't have to go 100 miles. The ships may have been close to 100 miles apart, but you could have two totally separate, let's say, drones, two different groups of drones. Who knows whether these things were being launched from a ship, a sub. I mean, we do have stealth ships out there. They've got technologies now to launch drones from submarines. And even what was really interesting, Henry, is I found one where they showed it was almost like a torpedo could be launched out from the submarine. Then that torpedo-like device could deploy a drone to try to get this thing to an area that's completely undetected. So you had the Kid, which is about 70 miles off of San Clemente Island, but you had on the other side of San Clemente Island, that was where the Russell was at, and that area is getting up closer. Where they're really at is up closer to Catalina Island. So you may have had military groups from the island launching it, but who knows? I mean, you would think there'd be communication between the groups if there are. You would think.
And I suppose they didn't create any sound either.
No, there's no sound being noted on there.
Okay. Wow.
But this story went from this website called The Drive. It went to Fox. It went to CBS. It went to NBC. It made the rounds of the major newspapers and stuff. And you can see where they're still digging into it.
Wow.
There is also, by the way, another incident on the 25th, where again, they'd been seeing objects off the ships again, and they deployed their visual teams to go out and look to see if they could find an answer on who these things were, what these things were.
Well, interesting.
Yeah.
Well, and it's that whole area, too, that seems to be, like I said, UFO hot activity.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't understand exactly, the shape of the pattern of the islands out there, whether that was an extinct volcano, possibly. I'm not quite sure what kind of tunnels or could be at the bottom of that. Yeah. But you mentioned before about the planes up in the air, the searcher planes, seeing water being disrupted. But that sounds like a heck of a lot like a submarine rising to the surface, right? Getting rid of the ballast.
You're right. That's one of the things I thought about, because when the story came out originally, they were mentioning the water was frothing. They thought originally maybe a commercial liner had crashed in the ocean and was sinking. And one of the things that I thought about is actually a couple things. One is, like you said, Barbara, could it be a submarine submerging in that region? Or something else I thought of is more of an off-the-wall idea. But you've got a whale in that region. What if you had a school of whale just going around and they stirred the water up? But the object was seen rising up then from that disturbance.
Well,
so it kind of eliminate the whale thing.
Yeah, but they have radar and guys listening from sound too. They would have picked something like that up. They'd have heard them on their earphones.
Yeah, they should have picked those because remember correctly, the USS Louisville was out in that same region, which is a nuclear sub.
Right.
So you'd think they'd pick it up, but also in that region, they most likely had a lot of underwater detection equipment just out there that's deployed. So if, let's say, the Russians try to bring a submarine up through that region, they detect the signal of that submarine underwater.
Wow.
But it was amazing how much stuff I turned up just researching this. When I found a map of the area, or it even breaks down that whole region, Barbara, on what the different regions are for. And then they even say that, okay, you've got small experimental aircraft. They're based at this area. This other aircraft flies between 20 and 30,000 feet. This aircraft goes at this altitude. They break it down that way. And when I went in with my flight tracking software, you could see that aircraft were definitely avoiding this whole region. Commercial aircraft and private, because they're being directed around it. One plane I did find going through was actually an older 707 Henry. And when I looked it up, it was actually a refueling plane that was being rented by the military. And it was flying like a big circle in the region out there, and it was evidently refueling aircraft for the military. You couldn't see the military aircraft, but you could see this refueling plane flying around that whole region.
Wow.
So I'm going to keep researching this case to, see what else can turn up. Because true, it may not be along the alien side, but to me, when you've got these vehicles that we can't account for, that are flying around naval ships in that region, and you have other instances like the Tic Tac event, which I treated totally separate from this one, and other events going off to military. I mean, it's just a big question mark. Who's doing it? Is it our people just testing stuff out and just not telling anybody they're doing it,
Yeah, but you'd have to wonder why.
Well, yeah, you really would, because it's like you're telling me that you're bringing something in to, for whatever purpose, detection purposes, testing out new equipment, close to our naval ships without telling their commanders. To me, it's not a good idea. Like Barbara said, they could fire up some guns and start shooting,
That's what I'd have.
Yeah, I'm surprised they didn't.
I'd have figured out some way. And if it was overcast, how were they seeing so many of them? I mean, they had to have been real close to the ship, I guess, to see them.
Well, see, that was the other thing. I started trying to pull up the information the best I could on weather conditions. And I wasn't getting real detailed stuff because I don't know if I'm really looking in the right place. But the other problem is now you're 100 miles off the coast of California, and the weather conditions can change quite a bit when you start going 100 and some miles off the coast.
Yeah.
But I was interested. It was interesting to me to find out how many other military ships were in the region that weren't even noted in their article in the same group. Also, how many fishing vessels were around the same region. And I couldn't help but think, okay, what if it was like something like a fishing trawler that had these drones going around? They were launching them from, just to see what they could discover.
Wow. Boy, our time's really going by fast tonight. I got some questions already from the chat room. Now, I'll get into those after break, so we can. Have you guys got anything else to ask about this, Jeff, Barbara?
Always fascinating to listen to them.
It sounds like it's either one of ours or somebody else's, and not necessarily UFO related, but again, it kind of boils down to, doesn't it? When everybody's starting to look for UFOs, we're going to start to see other activity that maybe people are trying to keep secret.
Well, you're right, because they've also been working on another drone called something 180, which it looks like a stealth bomber a little bit, but it's one that's supposed to go much higher and have a lot more capabilities than some of the drones do in the past. So, you may be seeing a lot more stuff like that popping up.
Now, this this took place in 2019. Is that what you were saying?
2019.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right. We got some other stuff coming up. You got a new airline case from 2021. We'll be talking about it after the break because we ain't got but about 5 minutes and don't want to get started on that until after we come back. Lots of other stuff that I've got down. I seriously doubt if we get to very much of it. I know we also have an audio. I could play that, and that's for the that's an airline case we'll be talking about when we come back. I can go ahead and play the audio for that. It's only about 15 seconds long. It's not easy to hear. But
Well, that's why it's an audio daily double.
yeah. So if you want to turn your sound up, let me get it ready here, and I'll play it. I'll turn my sound up a little bit louder for you also, and we'll see if you'll be able to hear that. Let's see here. That is the, what was that one called? The Taylor
Swift?
It's ATC audio.
ATC.
Yeah.
That's right. I sent you the wrong one, Barbara.
Yep.
There you go.
I did.
It explains why I was hearing the wrong thing.
That's why I did. Okay. Go ahead, because Barbara and Jeff won't be able to hear it, and I don't think Tom will either. But I'll try and play this a little louder here and see if you guys can hear it. So
You want to do that after the break? We're coming on, and we could just.
no, I'm going to go ahead and play this ahead of time, and that way we
Okay.
can talk about it when we come back from break. So, because I'll probably have to play it a couple of times. It's hard to hear, so people listening in can put their headphones on, see if you can hear this. So, listen up. Here it goes.
Have any targets up here? We just had something go right over the top of us that, I hate to say this, looked like a long cylindrical object. It almost looked like a cruise missile type of thing moving really fast that went right over the top of us. Have any targets up here? We just had something go right over the top of us that, I hate to say this, looked like a long cylindrical object. It almost looked like a cruise missile type of thing moving really fast that went right over the top of us.
Okay. You can let me know if you was able to hear that in the chat room. And we will be talking about that when we come back. So I heard it real good that time. So we'll talk about that when we come back from break. I guess we can go ahead and take a quick break, and we'll come back and we'll be talking about this. So give us about 6-7 minutes, something like that, and give us time to stretch our legs while I do this, and we'll come back and we'll be talking about that. So Jeff, you want to take us out to break?
Yep, we're listening to the Paranormal View on para-x.com with your hosts Henry Foister, Ceiling Cat Barbara Duncan, and myself, Jeffrey Gould, with tonight's always wonderful, excellent guest, Thomas Wertman. So stay tuned for more of the Paranormal View after the break.
Whether you're listening at home, at work, or anywhere, thanks for making Para-X part of your day. Your source for everything paranormal, Para-X.
And welcome back, everybody, right here to the Paranormal View on the Para-X Radio Network. Want to thank everybody for being with us tonight, those here in the chat room and those listening from around the world. We appreciate each and every one. Thank you for listening tonight. Tonight we have with us Barbara Duncan.
Hello, everyone.
And we got Jeffrey Gould.
Hello?
And we have our great guest, Thomas Wertman.
I'm still here.
Still here, huh? All right. I hope everyone in the chat room was able to hear the audio clip that I played. I think I played the right one. So I guess these guys were flying and something flew over the plane.
Yeah. There's people out there, Henry, that monitor air traffic control sites all the time. I mean, they just basically monitor all aircraft traffic. And I turn on occasionally in the background because I'll listen to certain centers. I mean, you can go into a website called ATC, which is Air Traffic Control, and you can monitor flight traffic. Let's say, for example, if you're out in Los Angeles, you go into that website and it'll give you different channels you can listen to over the internet, or let's say the tower, various aircraft in the area. And you've also got other people that like to listen to just the pilot transmissions. And there's any number of reasons they like to do it. Some is they just, like maybe they're pilots themselves. They like to hear chatter. Maybe they're training to be a pilot and they like to hear, the proper procedures for doing things. But then occasionally there's these things that pop up out of nowhere that, kind of leave you scratching your head. And in this case, an individual's monitoring the flight traffic and they picked up that transmission that you heard. And the transmission basically says it was some pilots on board of an Airbus 320. And the Airbus 320 was going from Cincinnati out to Phoenix. It was an American Airlines flight, Airlines Flight 2292. It's a common route to be flown, and is there roughly in the region, and just right around the New Mexico border, going in this case west. Right as they're out there, the pilot comes on and goes to ATC and says, "Do you have any targets up here? We just had something go right over top of us." And I hate to say this, but it looked like a long cylindrical object that almost looked like a cruise missile type of thing. It was moving very fast and went right over the top of them. Now, I went in with what I've got access to, and I had to go in right away and look up their flight number. And I can go back a couple of years on this. And I pulled up their flight. I could see it leaving Cincinnati, going out to Phoenix, and I could track it the entire way. So when it started getting out in the region where they were at, I started, making notations of any aircraft in the area, because when I look at the website I use, which is Flight Radar 24, I've got a business account with them. I can take and see what other aircraft are potentially in their vicinity as they're going out there. And I could see that right around the area, right around the border of New Mexico, maybe about 40, 50 miles in, they had a Learjet go directly over top of them. But it was about 4,000 feet difference between them at least. And the thing I could also do is I could pull up the altitude of the American Airlines plane, which is a 37. I could pull up the information about the Learjet. The thing I liked about the American Airlines plane, it told me their altitude, their airspeed, where they came from, where they were going. When I pulled up the Learjet, it only told me what model and gave me absolutely nothing else about it. It just said it's basically at 37,000 feet, and that's it. It didn't tell me where it originated from. It didn't tell me where it was going to. And normally what you can do is I can go in there with this website and I can download the entire flight path of the plane. So that's why I always do is I download it and I can upload it into Google Earth so I can actually see kind of a 3D representation of what the pilot was seeing. And I wish you could have seen the pictures that disappeared, Henry. This is where I think it's a conspiracy. One of the pictures I sent you was actually a pilot view looking out from the commercial plane as it's heading out to Phoenix. Right in the area where they're at. The plane in question, the different ones were arguing. They said, well, this Learjet that passed above them, that had to be it. Some were saying right away it had to be the answer. Well, when you've got something moving by you at very high speed since they're going in opposite directions, but it was quite a distance above them. And the way the pilot sounded, the object was much closer than what this Learjet was. I mean, to me, if you've got almost a mile separation, that's quite a bit. And the Learjet shouldn't appear like a cruise missile at a closer range going overhead. The drawback with the Learjet, when I put the information in, is I had to go back and do more work to eventually find out it came from Salt Lake and was going to Boca Raton. But I was never able to pull up their complete flight path. For some reason, that information wasn't being allowed to be displayed. I don't know why, but it wasn't there. So there's a debate over, hey, was this a Learjet going directly overhead? Another problem with that is there is a time frame difference on when the Learjet went overhead and when the pilots reported the object. It was like a 9-minute difference between the time frames. And they're saying, hey, if the pilots saw this and went directly overhead, shouldn't they be calling it in immediately rather than having a 9-minute difference between the two?
You would think.
You would think. That was something I looked at.
Unless it was some kind of time distortion.
Time distortion, or one of the things I looked at is they said, is there any military bases in the area that could be, using cruise missiles? And that area is supposedly just for commercial. I mean, there's heavy flight traffic through there all the time in that region. And anything involving that type of military weaponry, to my knowledge, should be well south of that region. It shouldn't be in that area. But this is like the second time now. Aircraft going out through that region have encountered something now they can't explain. They're trying to find more detailed audio tapes, and they're having difficulty with that. They're trying to track down exactly what air traffic controlled the conversations with. I think there's even difficulties there. So they're having problems tracking down the information behind this communication. And the pilots, by the way, have also not come out and talked about this. The one that occurred, about a year ago, the pilot did talk about it. And if I remember correctly, it was an American Airlines flight also. But this time they're being quiet. Nobody's saying a word about this. But here you've got a commercial airliner with something passing overhead that the pilot should know. If let's say if a Learjet's passing overhead at 5,000 feet, they should know what something like that looks like. And he's saying that this thing definitely looked more like a cruise missile and was moving very fast. What he meant by fast, he wasn't that definitive. But it was another encounter.
Because the one from 2017,
yeah.
The Phoenix lights there, the pilot who first reported that was actually Kurt Russell.
Really?
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
Huh. I didn't know that.
Father
I remember
of
that now that you said
Star-Lord. Yeah.
Yep. Yep. It was in Stargate. Yeah. Now that you mention it, Barbara, I forgot all about that. That he was the first one to report the Phoenix lights. Yeah.
Wow.
So but it goes back. These sightings are more than just one or two. There's several of them out there, and it's not just commercial pilots going through these. These are private. Now that private aircraft are becoming a little bit more common, there's people going up and they're having these things, these sightings and reportings, which they're too high up in altitude for it to be a drone, for the most part. So, what is it? Yeah,
because you had the one like a year ago that it was like a Learjet pilot was traveling west out in roughly the same area of the country. He reports something going overhead, and another pilot comes up and says, they tell another pilot coming after him that's on the same flight path, hey, see if you have something pass overhead. And he goes, yeah, something just passed overhead of me too. And it wasn't showing up on radar. So it's like, what is happening out there? There's also a case up in Oregon where things were being seen
Wow.
by pilots that they couldn't explain. Even scrambled military jets in the one in Oregon to try to intercept.
Well, they can't catch
But
it
these-
either, can they?
No. And these things are popping up. I mean, you've got some pilots reporting them, but this one probably would have gone completely unnoticed unless somebody was monitoring the air traffic control. That's how they picked up on the story.
Well, I mean, we're at a point too now, and I think the case in Washington, was it last week or the week before, it turned out to be uncontrolled entry of a space junk, basically. Now that we're getting at a point where a lot of the stuff that we projected into space is going to start crashing because the orbits are deteriorating so much.
Yeah, you better put your umbrella out, Barbara. That's all.
Like that's going to do any good.
But you're right. There's going to be stuff that if you really think about it, how much stuff has been launched since the early 1960s, and that stuff's going to eventually decay. But they're also reportedly working on technologies to bring it down, some of this stuff down, putting basically like destroyer satellites up there to knock them out of orbit. Some of this stuff that's useless anymore.
Wow. Might not be bad.
But then
Well,
again,
if you take a look at what's up there, I mean, they've shown photographs. It's horrible.
it is. I mean, and I'm not faulting Elon Musk, but I'm just mentioning Elon Musk because he's launching like every so many days 60 satellites
Yeah.
in his goal to put like 10,000 satellites up in space for improving internet access and communications.
We're going to need traffic lights when we're going to Mars.
Yeah. It's
Oh.
almost like litter on the side of the highways.
Yeah, exactly. It's going to be like plastic in the ocean before long,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. I got a question here from the chat room, and I promised I would get it in. It's from Tabby Cat, and she wanted to know, have you heard of any truth that the time travel experiments done during World War II were based on confiscated extraterrestrial technology like the Philadelphia Project?
Yeah. Matter of fact, she mentions that. And one of the things, I mean, since we don't get out that much, like we were talking earlier about getting like our second vaccinations and stuff like that, to hopefully give us a chance to get out more this year. I've been listening to a lot of the old broadcast. And one of the ones that I listened to about a week ago, coincidentally, was one about the Philadelphia experiment. And it went back to, it's actually the old Art Bell show. And Art had on an individual who reportedly was involved with the Philadelphia experiment. And it goes back to like doing the research and investigation. I mean, here you've got the guy telling his story, and he sounded very, very, very believable. I've got a little bit of a technical background, and this guy appeared to be, based on my knowledge, reciting things that sounded very legitimate. He was talking, in this case, about the Elridge, which was a ship at that time that was built, and he made the comments that reportedly the ship was being built in such a way that it would allow this equipment to be put into the ship for experimentation. He'd mentioned that Tesla was involved with it in the early stages, but then later on Tesla became scared about what they were getting into, and he wanted out because he was just afraid of what they were getting involved with. He talked about being on the board the ship with him and his brother, and talked about the ship basically as it went through the experimentation, basically turning into a fog and then disappearing and rematerializing elsewhere. And then kind of like in the movie, he described it, the ship returned and actually some people were found embedded into the ship itself.
Yeah,
I mean, to me, when you hear the story, it sounded very, very, very interesting. But I just wondered about things. I mean, I'm thinking the ship, the Elridge. I mean, what happened to it afterwards? Because certainly, if you've got a naval ship like that, you should be able to tell if like huge generators had been installed inside the ship. These things have been taken out in such a way. There would be like evidence left over. Now, if I remember correctly, I'm going out of memory here, the Elridge actually turned up in some place like Italy years later under a different name. And it reportedly didn't have all the changes made to the ship like were being claimed. But the individual, I mean, sounded very, very believable. And I'm going to try to look his name up here real fast as I'm thinking, because I'm drawing a complete blank on it.
But also, I mean, it could not necessarily have to be alien technology. I mean, nobody could find Tesla's notes afterwards. So my guess is that we might be working off of Tesla's notebooks too.
That's because after Tesla died, his domicile was raided, and all of his notes were stolen by either CIA, FBI, or both.
More than likely.
Wow.
Yeah.
I've almost got the name here, I think. I don't know why I'm drawing a blank. Oh, Al Bielek was the guy's name. Al Bielek was the one who was talking about it, and he's passed away since, to my knowledge. But he was one who was laying out all these details about the Philadelphia experiment and what happened. But it wasn't based on alien technology. It was based on things that Tesla and different ones had been developing. But I kind of had doubts about that. Now, on the other side, though, what, Kat may be picking up on is that when you get into the German side, that was where there were rumors of things being potentially discovered that, could have gone back to, again, reported alien technology. They were working on a device called the Bell. And you can find, description of it on the internet very easily.
Well, it's also in every other episode of like Alien, Ancient Aliens and such like that. They refer to the, they call it the Nazi Bell and all.
Yeah, Das Bell. Das Bell, they call it. And that one reportedly used something like mercury being revolved at extremely high speeds in this shell of this thing. And it would create an effect. Now, and there's been the different shows I've seen where they showed, okay, this is where the Bell reportedly was at. This is like a tower that was kind of like built around the Bell. But again, there's nothing solid proving that that's what really went on. All we have is these interesting stories. The stories behind it reportedly was ferreted away after World War II. Reportedly back to the United States. There are other reports that the Bell was put on board of a German aircraft. They had only like 2 of these types of aircraft which were designed for super long distances. And reportedly was put on an aircraft and taken to South America. And went to the German communities and disappeared down there. There's even other stories where the UFO crash that happened in Kecksburg, Pennsylvania. Back, it had to be, 1960s, 1970s, that was actually the Bell. Something went wrong and the Bell basically crashed into that area because the witnesses reportedly described something that appeared to be something like bell-shaped. that had kind of like a hieroglyphics around the outside, and reportedly that's what the Nazi bell has, almost like hieroglyphics around the outside. But again, we've got these great stories about the alien technology being reverse engineered, or aliens helping out different ones develop technologies, but we're not seeing, to me, really true solid evidence to support that. We just have, at the end of the day, great stories.
They were using mercury?
If I remember correctly, that's what it was, because it connects into another story that they were talking about too, on our Barber, where over off of Norway, the Germans were trying to transport massive quantities of mercury out of the country. And there is a submarine which sank containing a lot of it. And this is a fact. The submarine sank off the coast of Norway. They found the submarine, and they were scared about the canisters with the mercury rupturing, because they knew how many canisters were on board. So they actually built like a sarcophagus to go around the submarine to contain it. But the mercury was reportedly on the way to Japan, but its use was going to be for, again, this goes back to the stories, for the bell, for this technology.
I can't imagine how they expected anybody to be in those capsules. That stuff is toxic as heck.
Well,
It
reportedly,
wouldn't necessarily be touching the occupants. Could be within the structure itself.
Yeah, but if anything cracks, you get the vapor. That's gonna. Ugh.
well, reportedly there were a number of people who did die around the experimentation.
Oops.
So they're coming up with all these metals to use as a means of propulsion. Didn't we just come up with one now for matter or antimatter propulsion engines?
I believe we did, but I'm not sure of all the details behind it.
Well, I thought they were focusing more on the possibility of an ion pulse engine.
Well, that was for long-term and small, like drone type things that Stephen Hawking was working on to for interstellar travel.
That was almost going to be like 95 or more % the speed of light, almost.
Right.
Eventually would reach that.
Right.
Matter of fact, if they want to look at the name of that, it's up. It's actually the Glock, is what it was called.
I've heard of that one.
Yeah, the Glock. That was actually the German bell.
Mm-hmm.
And there were hieroglyphics around it. Could it have been like Nordic writing?
Well, the thing is, they weren't that definitive. They just said it appeared it was an unusual kind of like a writing around the outside of the device itself.
Wow.
I'm going to put a link to you in the chat. There we go. That has information, which shows a drawing in the article with the glyphs. If you want to put that link into the main chat.
Yeah, that's the image. It's over in Kecksburg, by the way. I've been there. I went to a UFO convention over there, and I knew it was close to Kecksburg, so I had to make a little drive over to see where the site was at and all the details behind it.
Wow. So there's a lot of new stuff going on. More and more is now, I guess, kind of like being revealed and coming out. They are pretty much now admitting and searching and revealing more about UFOs.
Yeah, back in December when the one budget was approved for the U.S., part of that budget contained the money to operate a program, Henry, for basically researching these events to me, it's on the military side. Looking at these encounters that the naval personnel's having, other military personnel's having, and looking at them from the point of view, are these a risk of national defense? And there's supposed to be a report coming out. They said 6 months after the budget was approved, which would make it like, it was approved something like December 27th. So you're looking at basically like the end of June. That report should be coming out in regards to this. Now, I wouldn't expect to see a lot of information, but it's a report that goes to Congress.
Mm-hmm.
But I wouldn't expect them to say, hey, guess what? We just found aliens. Because they didn't say they have to tell you everything.
Right.
But I think you may see a little bit more information regarding, okay, certain events may have been pertaining to, let's say, military exercises. But I don't think you're going to see things done to a level where they're going to be looking at, let's say, commercial aircraft or private aircraft encounters, or for that matter, individuals who just basically see things from the ground. Not unless they correlate with some of these military encounters. That's when they'll go that far, I think. But it's going to be a lot of it related back to, military events.
I look at it that there's aliens that are already here. And some of them look like we do. Now, whether the others can walk around invisibly or not, I don't know. But I'm pretty sure that there's some that's around that are aliens that we probably rub elbows with and don't even know it.
There's been some talks I've done that I'll tell you what, it really got me after the talk was over. I did a talk down in a little small community in Ohio that it was a smaller library that I don't know how they did it. We jammed like 40 to 50 people in this little tiny corner of the library. I mean, there was no private meeting room or nothing like it. It was just right in the open. They said, hey, basically come over here like where the kids section is at. We're going to cordon it off so nobody can get into it. We're going to put everybody over there. We'll put your projector up and you can do a talk on UFOs. Well, this is one, Henry, when I had to do a double take. I'm over there getting ready, getting my projector all set up, getting my computer all fired up and stuff like that. And I look over, and there's 3 men that look something like albinos. Very, very pale skin. They all had similar appearance. And they're sitting there looking forward, not at me, but looking forward at almost like a 90-degree angle from me. Just like they're staring into space. So I looked over. I'm doing like these, these triple takes, kind of like, okay, yeah, they're still there. Yeah, they didn't go anywhere yet. Yeah, yeah. And they're apparently waiting on me to talk. And then all of a sudden they turned in unison and looked directly at me. If no word, you couldn't see their mouths move at all. I'm like, that's weird. I wasn't starting the show. They just all turned for some reason at the same time. No word changed between them. And they just stared right at me and just started looking at me. I'm like, now this is kind of creepy. And I'm thinking, were these guys the men in black? Were these guys, like you said, who knows? Maybe aliens for all I know. Wanting to know what I'm talking about in this given day. Who knows? Maybe they live in the region. They habitate this region and they saw a UFO. And let's go out and see what this person is talking about. Let's see what they know about us, But it really got me, and I called up multiple people that were there at the same meeting. I said, there's anything weird about that meeting? Yeah, there are these 3 guys over in the corner.
3? Wow.
Yeah, that really kind of shook them up. And everybody I talked to without prompting said the exact same thing. So that was weird.
Wow.
But at times I don't doubt, what you're saying, Arthur, that they may be around us right now for all we know.
Was that the only time you've seen them at any of your talks?
That was the best way to describe it. That was the creepiest one.
Oh.
I've had a couple times where I've had just like an individual that's there. And one guy actually picked him out at the group. at one of the meetings that he was actually military. And I looked at this guy. I said, you look to me like you're military or former military. And he was in his 50s, something like that, late 50s. I said, your demeanor, your look, I said, all your actions appear something like somebody who's been trained in the military their whole life. And he got this smile on his face, and he reached in his pocket, and he pulled out his business card, and it was Colonel.
Yeah, that's kind of yeah.
Yeah, he was a colonel. He says, yeah, you got it.
Wow. They're,
But you have to kind of suspect that, Air Force guys, NASA people, whatever, they've all got to question what they're seeing. And they may not go to their superiors about it, but you have to think that even they're starting to wonder themselves individually if there are UFOs, right?
Yeah, when you get so many reports coming in, earlier we talked about things that may, relate back to potentially our technology or somebody else's tech here on Earth. But there's so many reports that do come in that, we don't have explanations for over the years. That they've got to wonder. If you think about it, if you're on the military side and you have these different encounters coming in, that maybe they're not coming out openly and telling people, but they have data to support what happened, and they're just not releasing it. Let's say radar data, other types of data that they're picking up on that, they're not releasing, but it says, hey, something did happen. There have to be cases like that out there. There have got to be.
Now, Patsy had a question, said, you should go back to that same library and do another talk there and see if those guys come back.
Well, I was thinking about that one, but there was another one I went to that this was kind of a wild story. Back in the 70s, one of my buddies that I hung out with, somehow we got in a conversation, and his brother was actually stationed at Wright Pat. And his brother was military police. And he was told to basically kill somebody that got in a hangar down there. And it sounded just like, okay, this is where the UFOs were kept. In that same conversation at some point, it came out that, hey, there's this town in Ohio where aliens live.
Really?
Yeah. And I won't tell you on the air.
Oh, okay.
But here's the weird thing about it. We talked about that. I talked to this with my buddy back in the 70s, and I totally forgot about it for years. When I got in the MUFON, I was talking to one of the other people who's been involved with MUFON for years. And I said, there's this town in Ohio. And he goes, okay, what's the name of the town? And I told him, and his jaw almost fell to the floor. He goes, how did you know the name of that town? That's why I lived about 20, 30 miles from here. He goes, really? Well, this guy calls over another long-term UFO investigator and says, tell him the name of that town you just told me. And I didn't say anything else involving the whole story, and I just mentioned the name of the town. The guy goes, how did you know about that town? Well, I did a talk in that town.
They don't start the next sentence with, we're sorry, you know too much.
Yeah. Well, I did a talk in that town at a library the one time, and I was just watching to see if somebody showed up. So it's either, Henry, nobody stood out, or everybody there was an alien. And that's why nobody stood out from each other.
Wow.
But we threatened to go up and run an
And the
ad
name of the town is I'm Not an Alien.
that's
Ohio.
right. That's right.
Only regular people here.
Okay. I want to see everybody raise a hand if you have watched Resident Alien.
Oh, yeah.
I
But
don't
it's
have
interesting, on that show, they had that guy's been in military, I think, forever. They showed a episode where they attended a UFO conference.
Yep.
And the stories that were coming out of that conference, Thomas, you would love, because it sort of rings to how most people who get up there saying, yes, I have an implant, here's the x-ray sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
They did a very good job of portraying some of the smaller community UFO type events.
Well, I haven't seen all the episodes, but after the last show I was on, I binge watched it one day for like 5 episodes, something like that. and it was funny. It was funny. I did have to laugh. I mean, it was good. It was well done. But from the small community point of view,
you'll have to watch it all the way through to the end of the season, and I mean, it was funny, but at the same time, he was sent to destroy Earth because Earth was just becoming so perverted. And if you look around today at how bad things are, how do we know that the aliens aren't here to take care of that also?
Well, that's true. I mean, all you got to do is turn on the nightly news and it's
very true.
Something every day,
Yeah. And I look at it like this. The news, I mean, the stuff is bad, but the news projects it like it's something that's happening every day, everywhere. I mean, which in one instance it kind of does, but at the same time, it's been doing that forever. So they're trying to publicize it even more dramatically right now, I think.
Yeah, and that's the problem I have with the media. And that's why, like I was kind of inferring back when we started the show about the UFO side, that, there's different ones out there to promote, this, what's happening in a light that's creating everything out there is unusual. Everything out there is aliens. Well, that's not the case. I mean, you may have something that's being created by our own military or somebody else's, and to me, it's still UFOs. We don't know what they are. But the thing is finding out what it is, who they're, who's doing it, and not exaggerating it and blowing it way out of proportion. Unfortunately, that's what some of the news shows do. But like with this UFO case I talked about earlier, the thing that happened is that was yesterday's news, and now they're on to something else.
Well, it's kind of a fad, don't you think? I mean, in the paranormal community, it's whoops, everything's a demon, and in the UFO community, it's whoops, everything's alien. And
yeah, or everything's an alien demon.
Yeah. Well, them too. Yeah. There is that, that pie chart where the circles do cross. And it seems to me that, there needs to be that group of very stoic, both feet on the ground type of groups that do question and analyze everything that comes through.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, I tell people, like I was telling somebody not long ago, I said, I'm not a debunker. I'm not a debunker. I'm just trying to separate really the fact from the fiction,
Wow.
And we kind of, there's room for conjecture, and people forget that you do have to speculate, and you do have to make some speculations and about what you're seeing.
Right.
But it's never an answer until it's thoroughly documented that it is.
Yeah. I mean, to me, when I look at these cases of the drones, I said, what's to say that there's not other encounters that's actually happening? Like, let's say the Tic Tac. The Tic Tac may be something that's alien for all I know. But that's why I don't want to confuse with the cases that's going on here recently with the kid and so forth, because, that may be our technology. And I don't want to lump that with the alien technology and kind of like confuse everything.
Wow. Now,
But then you come under fire from the people that want it to be an alien.
Oh yeah.
And then, yeah. So it gets a little sticky because most of what you're dealing with is UFO versus U.S. military. And, that's kind of sort of getting stuck between a rock and a hard place, really.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you think?
Yeah, and it's because you're always going to have those who, no matter what you say, what you produce, they're never going to believe you. It's going to always be an alien no matter what. And the way I look at it, Barbara, is, hey, I can't push a rope. I can't put toothpaste back in a tube, and I can't make somebody believe something they're not going to. And that's what you run into sometimes giving UFO explanations on what people are seeing. And I may have so much evidence behind what they saw, it's not funny, but you'll never change their mind at the time.
Wow. I was watching on TV today, they had a whole bunch of programs called Phantom Signals from Space.
Yeah.
We've been searching the skies to get any kind of radio transmission or signals. Have we actually caught anything that's credible that you know of?
Apart from the WOW signal?
Well, the WOW signal was one of the first ones from Ohio State that they detected.
Right.
And some of the ones you're seeing more recently, Henry, you're getting into these fast burst signals.
Right.
That are popping in. The one was up to right around 980 some megacycles, something like that, the frequency. But they're coming in for only like 1,000th of a second. These little tiny like bursts that they're getting. But what's interesting is this burst wasn't just like a one-time flash. It would, one of the ones that they've been monitoring more recently has had like a 16-day cycle where it's basically on for so many days, giving these little fast bursts. Then it disappears for X number of days and then comes right back like clockwork again. And this is where it's making, some individuals wonder, is this a potential intelligent signal from another world? The one is coming in from like 4.3 light years away from Proxima Centauri, I believe, is where it's coming from. There's another one they've tracked that's coming in, I calculated out something like 3,000 trillion light years away, or miles away, 3,000 trillion miles away. I mean, that's how far the signal is. Now, the one from Proxima Centauri, they said if you were standing on the moon using a cell phone, that's about how much power this signal has when it reaches Earth. Very, very minute. But what one of the assumption is, and again, it's just a possibility, I guess you could say, is that these, I believe it's neurostars putting out a very high burst of energy, mammoth burst of energy, and it maybe there is it could be like a cloud of particles around it, almost like something is broken up, creating like a cloud, and as this thing revolves, that this cloud is kind of like blocking or kind of like interfering with the signal, and that's where it's like disappearing, then coming back, disappearing, then coming back. It could be something along those lines. But now I'm going to go down to Jeffrey Road. Dyson Sphere is another thing that was thrown out there a while back. Those that don't know what a Dyson Sphere is, it goes back to Star Trek. Now, the one Star Trek presented on the one episode was, here is a star system, basically, that is a planet. Technology advances, it's going to keep demanding more and more and more power. Eventually, you get to the point that potentially every generator on the planet can't supply enough power to meet the demand. So what they do is they harness the energy of the star itself. They create, in this case, like in Star Trek, what they do is they created like a giant bubble. basically like a ship around the star containing the star. And what it would do is when the energy from the star came out, they would collect almost like with solar cells, in a sense, very simple way to put it. All the energy come from the star and harness all that energy. But it wouldn't have to be an entire sphere. A Dyson sphere could almost be like bands around the star at a distance, not even connected completely together, but almost like if you place solar cells completely around the star and could gather the energy. One of the different theories out there is, what if these bursts are coming from something like a Dyson sphere? That you have a star, as this thing revolves, these bands basically kind of like block off the energy. Or in this case, if these objects don't completely connect together, as this thing rotates, it's almost like little windows that the energy is popping through that creates a regular type of a signal coming from them. So that's one of the other theories, and you've got all sorts of theories in between them. But these are the fast radio bursts that they've been really working on, trying to detect. And the problem is the way I understand it, Henry, the way the signal comes off, it's very difficult to track where their origin is at.
Right.
And what's creating it.
Well, now, you're saying it's like a radio burst. Well, is that a radio wave that they're actually might be transmitting something that we would have to figure out what their language is? Or is it created from something else?
Yeah, the problem is it's actually on UHF band, and it's above, like our television band, the way I understand it, like UHF signal goes up to about close to 900 megacycles. This is above that band slightly. But it's such a miniature burst, basically, that a lot of them aren't considering it like a type of a communication because it's such a short burst. They would think that this would be much longer, more continuous. But then again, here's where, when you think outside the box, we're used to thinking in the way we do. Transmissions coming and being on for hours. Maybe whoever is transmitting this has a way of basically condensing a lot of that stuff that's coming out. But there is something about the pattern, too, they mentioned, Henry, that with this fast radio burst, that the signal's almost kind of like wavy. That, like when our frequency comes out, it comes out in a certain way, but this is like a wavy type pattern. That they're kind of eliminating it being like a communications method. That they thought that this wavy pattern is being created more by distortion from something like a cloud of dust or something around a star type object.
Wow.
Yeah, but it's this is one I kind of like to think of the Dyson sphere type idea, though, myself. I like that idea.
Well, I'm sure we have listening posts all around the world. Is there a special type of listening device that you got to be able to pick that stuff up with, or just to be able to listen on radio waves?
They've been doing it on the radio telescopes, the large ones.
Okay.
One of the places it picked up, I believe, was in China.
Yeah, they have a really large one now.
Yeah. They've got their it's a mammoth structure. If I remember correctly, it's like over 1,000 feet across.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's incredible in size.
They're wanting to pick up all the crumbs, aren't they?
That's
Yeah,
right.
we lost Arecibo, so.
Yeah, kind of lost that one.
Totally. It crashed. I mean, completely destroyed. So, oh well.
So Jodie Foster won't be going down there anymore.
No.
No, but that was SETI's main telescope, I believe. So I don't know if they're still operating out of the Arizona. Is it Arizona desert?
I believe it was where they had the massive arrays at.
Yeah, I don't know if they're allowed to use those or not, but SETI normally used Arecibo.
Yeah, those are private. They had to actually pay for space on those.
Wow.
I believe. Yeah.
Yeah, that was going back to the days of what's his name from it was with Bill Gates involved with him.
I know that I think the head now is Seth. Is it Seth Costick? I believe that's
Seth. Seth. What am I drawing blanks on the name? Seth Sostache
Costick.
was his name. That's been involved with SETI for years.
Yeah.
Okay.
But Paul.
Our time is running right on down, and I've got questions that we aren't going to be able to get to. So one is well, I'll tell you off the air, but we'll keep them saved up for the next time. So looks like we got less than about 2 minutes. So I guess what I'd like to do is have you give out all your information and everything. And, of course, then you're going to stay on until we're off. And
Yep.
we'll have more coming up next week. So, Thomas, go ahead. Give all your info out.
Oh, okay. I just kind of lost my train of thought for a second. Yeah, if they want to reach out to me, the easiest way is through my own, actually my own personal email at MUFON, MUFON .T Wertman, like my last name, at gmail.com. That's one of the best ways right now because those emails go to me directly. A lot of things we've been doing this year are still on hold yet because of the coronavirus. So I won't be doing a lot of talks we had planned, and same with a lot of conferences we had in mind are still in limbo until at least minimum later in the year.
All right. Well, we're going to be jumping off now, and I hope everybody had a good show, liked it, and we will see you next week at the same time. So this is Henry Foister.
I think Jeffrey Gould has been abducted by aliens.
Oh,
And this is Barbara Duncan saying good night.
all right. We will see you next week at the same time. So good night, everybody. You've been listening to the Paranormal View on the Para-X Radio Network. Join us again next week at the same time for more of the Paranormal